Hey, David, we talked a little bit about the American Association of Suicidology conference and how wonderful it was seeing a lot of folks there just a couple of weeks ago. But I really enjoyed one of my favorite moments was hanging out with Thomas Joyner, our guest today, and hearing him talk about his son graduating as a doctor. Just to hear him talk about that and see him actually get choked up talking about it when he was talking with a large audience about it was just so moving.
Yeah, John, we feel like we've sort of watched them grow up, so it's
Yes.
exciting. So let's get the show going and let's get to our guest.
Let's do it.
Welcome aboard Lifelines with David and John, your guide to charting the transformative course of crisis intervention and the game-changing 988 Lifeline.
Welcome back to Lifelines, the 988 podcast with David and John, where each call brings a new beginning. Thomas, we're actually coming from the heart and soul of Atlanta with this BHL-sponsored program every week, stretching out across the nation and diving deep every week into the pulse of crisis intervention, exploring the rich history, but also the promising future of 988. For all of you watching, we're your hosts, David and John. Dr. John Draper, one of the fathers of 988. I'm David Covington. I used to carry a pager and go to the emergency department in the middle of the night. We were crisis before it was cool. Watch us on YouTube, like and subscribe, or listen wherever you get your daily prescription of podcasts. We're brought to you by Behavioral Health Link, and episode 8 today I've been looking forward to. Brooklyn, tell us about our amazing guest and a little bit of the story for today.
Well, Dr. Thomas Joyner is known worldwide as really one of the top suicidologists and most influential people in suicide prevention out there. It's impossible to go through all the accolades that are surrounding Dr. Thomas Joyner, but just know that what we have with us today is somebody who has really made a difference in a lot of lives, not just researchers' lives, but practitioners' lives and people who want to prevent suicide. Think about and wonder about the things that Dr. Thomas Joyner tells us every day. So we're so happy to have you here, Thomas. You're just a fabulous guest and a good friend.
I'm happy to be here. Likewise, you guys both are great friends, and yeah, we've been at it since before it was cool, like David said. A solid 20 years at least we've known each other, the three of us. So great to be here.
So Thomas, that makes this next part hard. Normally what we do is have our guests tell us something that maybe John and I don't know about them. But what do we not know about you, Thomas?
Yeah, that might be hard. I don't know. I'm here in my office on the campus of Florida State, and you see the bookcase behind me. It's an actual bookcase. It's not like a cover. And I've got a collection of first edition William Faulkner novels.
Wow.
Up to my right. I've read all of them. He's a hero to me. And not really part of the collection, but kind of an add-on to it is a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh my goodness!
Wow.
Faulkner didn't write that one, of course. Harper Lee did, and she signed the inside of the book of the edition that I have. It's right here in my office. So there's something.
So Thomas, that's fantastic. I didn't know that, and we're going to push a little bit further to what you're a super fan of. Now, let me lay some context for that. I'm a super fan of, for most of my life, I've been a super fan of the University of Tennessee, Go Big Orange Volunteers. But because this is sponsored by Behavioral Health Link, we got a Georgia Bulldog shirt on today. John Draper, what are you a super fan of?
Well, I love football. I love the Tennessee Titans. What can I say?
Yeah. So Thomas, Johnny and I are going to take a piece of paper with my pen here, and I'm going to write down what I think you're a super fan of. But John, this is the no Florida State segment of the show. So Thomas has to come up with something other than the Florida State Seminoles.
Okay, because that's definitely what I would have said.
We're going to come back around to the Florida State Seminoles. So I'm going to write my answer down here. Okay, John, I've got mine. Have you written your answer for what Thomas is a super fan of? If it's not Florida State.
With this one, let's just...
All right, count of 3, 2, 1. Thomas is his sons. All right, so I said space. Thomas is a fan of just space.
Yeah, both things are very, very true. My son's first and foremost. Space too. I remember as a 4-year-old child watching Neil Armstrong step onto the moon. Yeah. So, and to this day, I'm a big fan. Looking forward to us getting back up into space, us being in the United States of America on a mission that's coming up pretty soon, actually.
So do you
Artemis.
go to any of the liftoffs in Cape Canaveral?
I've been to one. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it.
Oh, wow. Do you have any film clips of that? Perhaps on your
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm a like real, experience kind of guy. I don't
okay.
want to. I
Yeah,
don't want
good
to
for you.
mediate it.
Good for
Yeah, I don't
you.
want to mediate it by my phone. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, regretfully, I guess, but I don't
Yeah, look,
know.
we can see that on television. We don't
Yeah,
need to see it on your phone. I want you to enjoy it. That's great, Thomas.
So, Thomas, the reason I reference space is you have this picture on your Facebook profile, or used to, of the planet Earth from, I don't remember if it's Saturn or Uranus.
yeah. I think I think it is from one of our U.S. space program satellites orbiting Saturn, or
Yeah.
one of its moons. Yeah, and Earth is a tiny dot.
And your sons, Thomas, I don't want to get this right. It's not Obadiah. It's not Zechariah. It is Zeke and Malachi.
Yes, the older one's name is Malachi, and the younger one is Ezekiel.
All right. Well, look, this program is sponsored by Thomas grew up. We're going to get to Atlanta, but Behavioral Health Link provides a software solution, and they're our sponsors. John Draper, tell us about our sponsor.
Yeah, it's great to have our friend and colleague, Dr. Joyner, with us today. Thomas has not only had a huge impact on the field of suicide prevention, David, but he's also affected the way we do risk assessments in the 988 network. Thomas was chair of the Lifelines Committee on Standards, Training, and Practices back in 2007 when we established the national standards of suicide risk assessment for all crisis centers. And those standards are baked into the BHL platform. Thomas also worked with us and Dr. Jack Roselle to integrate best practices into the BHL platform for assessing people's risk who could present a harm to others as well. So, but Thomas would be among the first to tell you that assessing for risk is not designed to predict people's behavior so much as it is a process for guiding a counselor and the person they're helping to come to a mutual understanding of what kind of care and support they need and getting the help they need. And this is exactly how the BHL platform is designed, David, to guide a counselor and the person they're working with through a process of learning about their care needs, collaborating on a care together, and seamlessly providing recommendations and resources for connecting them to the care they need. If you want to learn more about how the BHL platform can enhance assessment and collaborative care in your crisis programs, be sure to check out behavioralhealthlink.com.
Wonderful, John. Thanks so much. So, Dr. Thomas Joyner is with us. Thomas, my sons, Will and Sean, were born in Piedmont Hospital back before we moved to out west. Were you born in Atlanta?
I was born in Piedmont Hospital.
You were born in Piedmont Hospital. So,
Yes, as was my mother.
Oh
Wow.
my goodness gracious.
The Joyner wing.
So this is an actual photograph of Atlanta, of course. I took this photo, Dr. John Draper, but why are you making a face? So today's over-under trivia is Atlanta has grown since Thomas was born in Piedmont Hospital. The city of Atlanta itself is large, but let's talk about the metropolitan service area. I think it's, what's it called, Thomas? The Atlanta, I don't know what they call it, Sandy Springs, something another, but it's essentially that 10-county area, John, of DeKalb, Fulton, Clayton,
Okay.
Gwinnett, Rockdale, Newton, that Cobb, Douglas, that sort of area. John, how many people live today in that area? And Dr. Thomas Joyner is going to say over or under?
Well, I'm going to say about 4.5 million.
4.5 million. Dr. Joyner, over or under?
Really, that's a very good guess, John. That's tough. I think it's right, maybe in that ballpark. I would say it's a higher number than that. So I guess I'm saying over. Slightly,
Yeah.
though. It's a very good guess.
Now, John has been, look, I made fun of John the first couple of weeks we did this John, you've been killing this for like weeks on end of nailing it, cutting that cake right down the middle. So Thomas doesn't know which side he wants. I would have said 4.5 million. I was surprised how much it's grown. It's up to over 6 now.
Wow. There
Over
it is.
6
Wow.
million large. And Thomas, you lived in Atlanta until when? Until you graduated from high school?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I was born there, as we said, in Piedmont Hospital, 1965, and moved away, and really haven't lived there since I graduated from high school in 1983.
Wow.
Atlanta's the new Hollywood too, isn't it, David?
What's that, John?
Atlanta's the new Hollywood, isn't it?
Atlanta, Georgia. Georgia is the new Hollywood, and it has been going back to The Walking Dead, that much of which was filmed in the big pit right outside of Atlanta. There's a where some excavation was done in the streets of downtown. Yeah, the number of movies. It's a tremendous. I just watched A Man in Full on Netflix, and it's so many buildings. I'm like, Rosa, I've been in that building. That's the Fox Theater. That's the Georgia Pacific building. Great fun. And Thomas, how frequent are you back?
Pretty frequently. My mother lives there. My sisters live there. A lot of my friends from back in the day I'm still close to live there, so it's pretty regular.
So let's go into our first segment today. And Thomas, you and I was so thrilled that you joined me in co-producing this documentary film, Moving America's Soul on Suicide. But I'm going to start with, my girlfriend's like, what's with the ants? So we're in Costa Rica. We're supposed to be seeing sloths. And she can't find me because the tour guide has moved on, and I'm back filming the leafcutter ants. So for our audience, what's up with the ants, Thomas?
Well, my idea, or my kind of cast of mind about human nature, is that it's got to be linked, not entirely, not at all entirely, but at least plausibly and somewhat, to the fact that we're embodied biological creatures, evolved over eons, and therefore always puzzled me and even troubled me a little bit about the question of how it is that suicide relates. Why would it exist given evolutionary pressures? And so, and all the while, people like Freud and Menninger and others, Schneidman, as a matter of fact, all of them emphatically and categorically said no non-human creatures die by, kill themselves. It doesn't happen in nature. And I just said, I looked up to those guys, so I kind of took it for granted. But then I grew up a little bit more and started questioning, whomever I wished to question, including those guys. And sure enough, it's pretty pervasive. Social insects are a really clear example. You mentioned ants, David. They self-destruct. Now, it's arguable. Do they think? Do they feel? There's not great parallels between social insects and us evolutionarily, and yet they do it, and they do it in a way, in a condition that I've argued is applicable to human suicide, namely when the calculation occurs to the creature, my death will be worth more than my life.
Right.
With in certain situations for ants, it's actually true calculation. And what I've argued over the years is that same calculation occurs to humans these days, and it's not true. Maybe it once was ancestrally, thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, but certainly not anymore. I've argued that it's a misfiring of that evolutionary module that we have. And I was reassured in this when I later discovered that there's another mammal besides us that does this kind of thing, namely the naked mole rat. And so that kind of is where all this comes from: ants, naked mole rats, and there's many other species too, shrimp, on and on. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and hey, David, make sure that we don't include any pictures of the naked mole rats, please.
Yeah, no, John, I know you're going somewhere else important on this, but actually, all kidding aside, I wanted bees and ants in the film. Justin's our filmmaker. He told his wife, and they have a beautiful daughter now, Ollie. But he told his wife he was going to set up ants in the house. He's going to and he was going to film them. And she's like, "You're not setting up ants in the house." So Rosa and we got hours of footage of the leafcutter ants, which was terrific. And Justin said, I want naked mole rats in the film. And I'm like, they're not going to be any, they're going to be awful. But, Thomas, I actually thought the footage of the naked mole rats added to it because it was the connection to mammals, and they were cuter than I thought.
Well, yeah. That's what I heard you say, is you thought they were cute.
I did.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, and we've talked a little bit about this, is this notion of, I think you call it eusociality, that it's this biological misfire that says basically the species is going to be better off without me. So it's almost kind of a misfire of the species preservation instinct. And we know that others also argue that intolerable pain and feeling trapped, and I just can't stand it. I can't stand carrying this burden around in myself anymore, right, is also a reason for people wanting to escape this pain through suicide, which seems almost like a misfire of the self-preservation instinct. So do you think that there is some combination of misfire instincts?
Well, I do think the calculation in present day human suicide is along the lines of better off, me included. And so I don't a lot of tension between those two. I think it's kind of inclusive that it's just going to be better for everybody, not just others, me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Miscalculation, of course, that's important to put that the miss in front of miscalculation. That's what it is. I argue it every single time. That's what it is in my opinion. And so, yeah, it does involve, intolerable pain, uncanny. Some people have described it as unspeakable or undescribable kinds of pain. I've been interested in that actually lately, characterizing why that would be in a suicidal crisis. Why is the pain qualitatively different than it is in other phenomena? And maybe it's not totally qualitatively so, but at any rate, it's an inclusive concept.
Mm-hmm. A burden. It's a burden in every way for me and for everyone else.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, Thomas, love that. We're going to go now to our good news section. And John, it's the first week that we've actually done some what is challenging news, but in the good news and wrapping it a little bit. But Michael Clays and I from Behavioral Health Link had the opportunity to run into Jennifer Dunn at that AAS conference you were talking about. She's the Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Field Operations South for the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. And she was talking about the work with farmers. And there was an article that the Commissioner Tanner was quoted in just back late last year about 1 in 3 Georgian farmers thinks about suicide monthly, according to the Georgia Rural Health Innovation Center at Mercer University. And the article was about some of the challenges. They talked about the Eccles family in particular, who have been generations of farmers around orchards. And they lost this past year, due to a freeze, 70% of their $2 million crop within a couple of nights. The peaches were just gone. They planted tomatoes, corn, and pumpkins to make up for the loss. But these kinds of constant stresses that are on farmers it's just a lot. And the good news is the work that folks like Jennifer and the commissioner and their department and others are doing, paying attention to supporting and making it okay for these, largely men and their wives and their families to talk about the stresses and work that they're doing.
It's really so important, David. It makes it even harder because there's this, of course, rugged individualist sort of thing. You've got to keep it in. You got to keep your head up. You got to keep moving forward, and if you can solve it yourself, that's the best way to do it. And of course, suicide is a way of solving these problems for yourselves. And if you have a gun and you have alcohol, which is also quite prominent in rural areas, then you have access to means and capability in a way that others don't. So it's a really, really high risk scenario, and we need special strategies to help people in agricultural areas.
Yeah. Thomas, men and suicide, farmers, And we're going to lean into that a little bit. Before we get to the generic topic, let's talk about an influential man in your life. Let's talk about your dad. We got to know your dad first through the opening chapter of your groundbreaking book, Why People Die by Suicide. But your dad had a full life as a prominent attorney in Atlanta, and we'll get to my interaction with your dad through the history as we get into the program today. But tell us about your dad, Thomas.
Well, he died at 56, and so that's the tragedy of our family and of his life. But it is important to remember, the man he was in life, and he was a very prosperous lawyer and businessman, very readerly. I think I get a lot of my book writing kinds of activities and such from him. Very kind man, very almost for the 60s and 70s in Georgia, you might even want to say woke.
Really? That I would have never known.
Interesting. How did he manifest that?
Just his openness, his openness. I think it had a lot to do with being contemporaries of people like Martin Luther King in Atlanta.
Yeah.
John Lewis and people like that. Anyway, he was ahead of his time. I learned that, from him. He also had bipolar 2 disorder, and it killed him, is my view of that illness and of his catastrophic early death.
Yeah, and Thomas, I know that was one of the many reasons that you were motivated to write the book Lonely at the Top, which I think you preferred to call The Lonely Sex, but
I didn't know that, John.
Yeah, is that right, Thomas?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the only book I've ever published with a kind of, top 5 or whatever they're called publisher. And so the stakes they thought were high. They thought they knew what they were doing about the title. And so I gave in to them. And
I think they're wrong, Thomas. Wow.
Yeah,
that was plainly wrong, and I regret it. And
And when I think about that, and I mean, again, how a lot of your theories coalesce in so many ways around not just suicide, but also the problem with men. And in fact, we were just talking about eusociality. And when you look worldwide, it's not just America where there's a 4 times greater rate of suicide among men compared to women, but you see that kind of data all over the world cross-culturally, which does beg for some question about, is there a biological substrate to this? And if there is some contributing biological factor, I think you and I have wondered aloud about maybe it's in this self-sacrifice thing that you were talking about with eusociality, where men, well, certainly women are known to be self-sacrificing, but mostly in service of caretaking. With men, it's like, I'm going to sacrifice myself for others to save lives, to fight wars, but they put their lives on the line. And maybe that is one of the things that perhaps contributes to them being more likely to kill themselves. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's a lot to what you're saying, and they're in the non-human species examples of self-sacrifice. It is also there clearly male linked, and so that, to me, that adds up to a signal, and it's a really important signal, and it shouldn't be lost. We lose a lot more men to this than we do others. Women included, although with non-binary folk, their risk is high too.
Yes.
So that should not be overlooked either. But that also should not be used to obscure in any way the fact that men, we lose far more men than women, and probably than non-binary folk, although that's becoming less clear than we do men. We lose a lot of men to suicide, that's for sure.
Thomas, so to John's point, though, a little bit, I've always assumed the differences in the death rate were more the capability component related to the way we enculturate the sexes generally. And one of the things was the 2011 conference in Beijing when the World Congress for IASP was there. And it was the first time I learned that China had a period of time where the female rate reportedly was higher than the male rate. It appeared, at least I was in a room full of Chinese researchers, and one of them suggested, because of almost leveling of the capability component relative to the enormously dangerous pesticides. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I do think, as John said, there's an international phenomenon, pretty much without exception, with regard to male-linked suicide death. If there ever has been an exception, right, just as you said, David, it's China, and it's not really an exception. It's more like an example of where there's a tie, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think you put your finger on why that is if you make this easier and easier and easier to do, then the capability for it becomes less and less and less relevant. The gender difference, sex difference also goes away in physician-assisted suicide.
I didn't know that. I knew it was.
Yeah.
I knew it was high for females, with physicians, with law enforcement, with military, but I didn't realize it's almost gone for physicians.
Physician-assisted suicide. Yeah, that, and it's very debatable. Yeah. And it's very debatable whether that counts as suicide or not. And that's a whole other question. Depends on your beliefs and values, sometimes religion. But that's interesting that there too, suicide is made easy, so to speak, as with the deadly, very deadly pesticides that you're referring to in China today.
Thomas, you just in reference to the Chinese experience being an exception, you also mentioned non-binary individuals. I think in both cases, it also is, partially explained by thwarted belongingness. I mean, there's a lot of women were treated very differently in China, and people who are non-binary are also treated very differently. And I think that also is a contribution of yours to helping us understand those suicide rates.
Yeah, good point. I do think loneliness is key, and I do think it also, as I argued in that book, Lonely at the Top is what it ultimately was called. That there is a male link to loneliness, and I explain in that book some of why that may be. Non-binary people may also feel that way. To be sure, anyone who feels that way, I've argued, across cultures, across psychiatric diagnoses, across all sorts of variables, anyone who feels these things, I've argued, is thereby at risk for death by suicide.
Thomas, let's talk about men on the gridiron.
Yes.
So, we held you back on Florida State in the Superfan section, but Thomas, it didn't make it into the film. I mean, with good reason, because we're not putting Florida State in the film, but we shot film on the day you didn't play, Thomas, because of COVID, right? We were there anticipating. Who were you playing that day? Do you recall?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember. But Thomas, how many games have you been to for Florida State?
Oh, countless. That would be, I can't even, I go to all of them, all the home games and a lot of the away games, including one coming up in August in Dublin, Ireland.
You told me about that. So, Thomas, we're going to find out if that's true or not, whether you've actually been to countless games. And we're going to start with a game we call I Was There or No, I Missed It. Are you ready for this game, Thomas?
Sure.
Okay, number one, I was there or I missed it. The 1993 National Championship, the first under Coach Bobby Bowden when you defeated Nebraska in the Orange Bowl.
Missed. I was not there. I missed it. Saw it on TV.
Where were you at, Thomas?
I wasn't even at Florida State yet.
Okay. So that would have required some future, maybe there'll be technology you can go back. Okay.
Was your Austin, Thomas?
No, that was my first job out of graduate. I was in Austin graduate school at the University of Texas. My first job out was as an assistant professor and then an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, in the Houston, Galveston area.
So were you a college football fan pre-Florida State?
Oh, yes. And to your shirt, of the Georgia Bulldogs primarily.
All right. So, have you heard the country song, Thomas, with the young woman who's wearing volunteer orange, and she's trying to explain to her parents who live in Athens why that's okay?
No, I have to look that up.
All right. Well, so Thomas, you didn't watch these games, but in your Florida State experience, what has been your when did you get introduced to wide right 1 and wide right 2? Do you know what those are? And if so, tell our audience.
No, that doesn't. And I'm very much of a connoisseur of college football, or at least I like to think I am, but I don't know what those are.
Some things I've forgotten.
You're referring to, okay. I misunderstood. I get it now. No, these are missed field goals and very, very crucial games, often between Florida State and Miami.
And both of them were Miami.
Yeah, most of them, yeah. And where the potentially game-winning kick went wide right.
So wide right 1 was in 91, wide right 2 was in 92, but then you win the national championship in 93. So let's go forward and let's see if I was there or I missed it. The 1999 perfect season, defeating Virginia Tech in the Sugar Bowl.
I was not there. I missed it. We mentioned my sons earlier. My younger one, Zeke, had just been born, so travel around like that wasn't in the cards back then.
So, John, just for the record, Thomas stated he'd been to every countless Florida State. He's not been to any so far.
Yeah, well, those are, you just happen to find the only ones he didn't go to.
All right, let's see if the streak continues. 1998, lost to the Miracle Volunteers, Thomas, in the Fiesta Bowl. It was the inaugural BCS National Championship.
Same story. 98 was my wife pregnant with Zeke. Malachi just haven't been born.
You sound like excuses.
So to be fair to Thomas, the Vols traded their souls to the devil or something, because that was the year Clint Sterner dropped the ball. How we went undefeated is anybody's, or how we made in the national championship. 2013 national champs, last minute touchdown, capped a second half turnaround in the Rose Bowl against Auburn. Thomas, were you there?
Yes, I was there. Pasadena, California, in the Rose Bowl, as you said, with Malachi in that case. The older of my two boys was there with me.
Better FSU experience than that, or is that the top?
That's the top.
Yeah.
I think more days are coming up like that, maybe even this fall.
Yeah.
So far, that's been the top.
I would assume that FSU is going to beat Texas and Georgia. I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
They're only ranked something like 15th going in preseason at this point. They're much better than that. Is my view, but we'll see. That's what I love about football, is talk doesn't matter.
So I hope, John, you wrote his sons in the superfan section up front. We have evidence that Malachi and Ezekiel are more important to Thomas than FSU Seminoles. We have the data's right here. Last one, Thomas. We did the highlight, the highest high in 2013. Were you there for the end? 2014, FSU's 29-game win streak ends against Oregon in the inaugural playoffs.
Also in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. And I also was there, this time with Zeke.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my goodness, Thomas. Well, hey, thanks for taking us down that memory road of football. And let's go.
Now the good luck kid, and Zeke is the bad luck kid.
Well, that was sort of the case until I think 2021. And this may be a little painful for you, John, as I remember that you have Houston roots, I think.
Yes, but I'm a University of Texas Longhorn guy for sure.
Now I'm shifting over to baseball, and the Braves beat the Astros in Game 6 in 2021.
Yeah, that was very big.
And I was there with Zeke. Zeke saw the Braves win the World Series. That was memorable too.
So Thomas, hard right on transitioning here from the fun and the highs and lows of a sports game. To the work that you've been so prominent in, from Why People Die by Suicide, myths about suicide, the lonely sex. but also a really amazing and tough book around murder suicide. But the question is, I really want to push into, and I missed it because this is the first year I've been back to the AAS conference in some years. But you did a joint session with Stephanie Pettix Willard that had to be both amazing and raw and shoot to the heart of some of this. Tell us a little bit about meeting Stephanie and the presentation that you guys did together.
She had lost family members to a very, I mean, all of them are murder suicide incidents are awful. All of them utterly awful, but hers it was definitely awful. If memory serves, it was her husband and the father of her child killed her child and himself. And that was years ago. She, of course, has spent those years reeling from this disaster and is now ready to talk about it. She thought she wasn't totally sure going into it last year, but she was up for it. It wasn't my idea. I don't recall actually whose idea it was. And I said, I was up for it as long as you are, Stephanie. Yeah, that's the question. And she wasn't 100% sure, but she was pretty sure. And it went great. We just had a conversation, an unstructured conversation. The reason it went great was her. She was just remarkable. And then I chipped in and chimed in with some perspective here and there, but mainly that was her forum to talk through what the utter tragedy that her and her family underwent.
John, have you met Stephanie?
I have not, but I was really moved by that, Thomas. And again, in the context of suicide prevention, and you've just written another book, The Varieties of Suicidal Experience, that I'd love to hear a little bit more about. But, we don't typically target things like murder, suicide terrorism, suicide by cop, running amok, the kinds of things that you talked about in your new book. That's not something we typically target for suicide prevention, but it sounds like you're saying we really do need to focus on these because we could actually not only prevent suicide, but we could also prevent horrific acts of violence. Could you talk a little bit about that?
That's exactly right, John. I mean, I was in that same mode when we first met. If you had asked me about, murder, suicide, or these other things, suicide, terrorism, etc., I would have kind of, not in an uncaring way, but I kind of would have shrugged my shoulders in a I don't really know kind of way, because I felt like I had my hands full already trying to understand, suicide and never mind the rest of it. But the questions kept recurring from audiences as I would give presentations, and it just gave me, pause to reflect on maybe there is something here that will be illuminated. I just didn't know when I went into writing that murder suicide book. It's called The Perversion of Virtue, because that's what I think happens in murder suicides, is that a person who's suicidal thinks to themselves, wait a minute, if I'm going to die, it would be the virtuous thing that someone else die too. That's, of course, not virtuous at all, but it's a perversion of virtue. The person themselves thinks it's virtuous. That's the gist of that book. Going into it, I really didn't know what I would discover, but that's what I discovered, is that that's kind of how it works almost always. And so that gave me encouragement to kind of branch out and look at these other things, because maybe the same thing would happen and maybe it wouldn't. Maybe I'd look at a phenomenon and say, this doesn't really fit. This is outside the boundary of what really counts as suicide.
Right.
It turned out that very few of these phenomena really clearly were outside. The only one that's close is physician-assisted suicide, and that's just inherently debatable.
Different. We should have you back on that topic alone sometime, Thomas.
Sure. But the book covers all those things and some more. Another one is called Death Row Volunteering, which I didn't even know that occurred until I started writing this last book. And so all those things, I argue, are at bottom suicidal. I don't think it's very debatable with any of them other than physician-assisted suicide, where it's plainly debatable.
So, Thomas, let me throw another one out. It's not the same, but it's a little bit related. So your book, Why People Die by Suicide, was absolutely life-changing for me. It upended everything I thought I had been taught as a clinician. But there was one element in the book that didn't resonate for me at the time, and that was the way you cast the 200-ish individuals who leapt from the World Trade Towers on 9/11. And part of it was, of course, that book was written much closer to 2001 than today. But I assume it also has to do a little bit with some of your views around the impulsivity. I wonder, do you think the same about that, or talk a little bit about that? I think at the time you sort of cast it as a result of terrorism. My thought was planes could hit those buildings and not be terrorist attack, and those people would be in the same situation.
My thought of it, again, there are a lot of things in this space that are just inherently debatable. And one thing's for sure is that those people on that morning, that Tuesday morning in New York City, they didn't plan their suicides that day. That's for sure. I'm not saying that.
Usual day.
Yeah, and a beautiful day it turned out, except now not after all this. Um, but what I was impressed by is the number of people who refused to jump.
Oh, yeah.
And they far outnumbered the people who did jump, and trying to understand why the difference.
Yeah,
there must be some difference that explains that, and it might have to do with things that are somewhat related to suicide, namely, facing death, capability of enacting death, and that just shows you how strong we are. Strongly, we're attracted to life and to living. That people in those towers would cling to the possibility, no matter what.
No matter what.
And
most of the jumpers were men, probably, Thomas. Is that right?
That's a great point. I would definitely expect that. I don't know know that to be a fact. I would definitely expect that, though. And I think that's right. I suspect that that's right.
John, the phrase that Thomas used years ago, but it stuck with me, and it had to do with this survey of elite forces, Thomas. You were measuring capability, and leadership said, yeah, we're all capable. And you said, yeah, we think that too, but we ought to do the research. And you made the statement that the will to live, despite however horrible the pain we're in, which we want to die, the will to live is, you said, in our cells and in our souls.
Right. It's inherent. It's deep. It's, ingrained, ancient. And I do believe that that's true. And I like that phrasing. I kind of use it from time to time and then forget about it. But I like the phrasing because it hits on things that I think are important in this space, namely biology, cells, but not just biology, also, psychology, soul, mind, things that aren't easily or at all necessarily reducible to biology. I think both are important, and getting drawn too far one way or the other, I feel is it depends on what you're talking about, but like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, pretty biological, but not fully even those. So that cells and souls captures kind of my mindset about things in a few ways.
The essence of humanity, John, we've been talking about today, cells and souls, love and work, our community. John, Thomas, you strike me as researcher / philosopher in many ways. We're going to end with a segment we call It's Coming or Ain't Gonna Happen. It's coming or ain't gonna happen. So, Thomas, I was really struck. Have you read Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens?
I have read part of it. I'm looking back behind me because I have it. Oh no, I have Homo Deus. Same guy, different book.
So Sapiens, the first 100 pages is it's as striking to my understanding of humans as your book Why People Die by Suicide was. And I'm not going to give the punchline away. It's amazing. But at the end of the book, he makes speculations about the future of humans that push into even whether the next, and we're already emerging in something that maybe you can't call it Homo sapien. It's something different. So I'm going to mention some things. Thomas, tell me whether you think that's coming or not going to happen. And I'm going to mix in some of Harari's with some Elon Musk and others. Fully autonomous vehicles are the norm.
Gosh, I think that's probably coming. I'm Not a fan yet, but maybe
Oh,
I'll get
look,
there.
John, you can see it on his face. He does not want to say yes to that, but it had to. Mars colonization, Thomas.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh my goodness. You said you thought about the cars, but I have trouble with Mars, man. That just seems like, so you're saying definitely.
You almost sound excited about that, Thomas. Not cars, but Mars.
Much more so. We already pointed this out about my fandom with NASA and said, yeah, definitely. And NASA's got a shot in the arm with people like Elon Musk, and that's only going to make NASA better, and I think that's great.
Genetic engineering and artificial intelligence.
Well, those are already here in big ways. It kind of depends on the way you think it's being expressed. In terms of, representing a human mind in artificial intelligence or creating genetically some sort of human artificial, I don't know. I'm very influenced by what happened to us ancestrally. Evolutionary type things have always been an important part of shaping my mindset. That's a philosophical thing, David. You mentioned that, and that's true. And I just don't understand. I don't believe that how we're ever going to get away from our biology. I don't think we should get away from our biology. I think it's an important part of our wisdom as a species, and so I just am skeptical of all that. But it's sure coming in some form or another.
All right, so let's just test that for a second, Thomas. I did another segment that we ended up not using. Is this AI or human quote from a Seminole fan? No matter the highs or lows, my heart bleeds garnet and gold.
Yeah, I could see either one coming up with that. It doesn't.
Well, that's the heart of the Turing test, isn't it? If you can't tell the difference, then
I would say I don't think it sounds that human because the first part.
Yeah. I actually assume it's a AI generated. I asked AI, but it could have lifted it from a human. We don't know, right? So the last couple ones here. We've been curing diseases. That continues to happen. But Harari says we're on the verge of, at least for people with access, of extending life indefinitely, aside from some kind of traumatic injury, effectively seeking immortality.
Right, we may be. I don't encourage that. I'm not.
You really need to colonize space, Thomas.
Right. I think I found American founders used the phrase "our posterity," and that's if you live forever, you don't really have a posterity, really, and so I don't know. I'm not a fan of that idea. There's something in it. I mean, death is a part of life, and I think that's, I don't know, tinkering with basic biology, that starts to worry me.
Absolutely.
Wow, Thomas, wow. Okay, so what an incredible look. John, the number of conversations I remember with Thomas riding in the car from Choke Cherry to the airport to fly to Atlanta from Samson headquarters, and things Thomas said, but I'm going to remember today. This has been fabulous, Thomas.
As always, Thomas. Very insightful and really powerful. Really appreciate your words today.
Thomas, John is not usually a believer, but I have never varied from absolutely true tales of Behavioral Health Link. And today, John, we're going to go back to when I was in the Citizens Trust Bank building, when Behavioral Health Link was just starting its Atlanta office. This is an actual photograph of me sitting in my 9th floor Citizens Trust Bank building, looking up toward the city. And Thomas, I had been in the restroom one day, and this man walks up, as in a small restroom as can happen, walked up, stood beside me, and he said he was Coach Bill Curry, who had been a famous football coach, and Georgia State University was starting a football program, and he was in the Citizen Trust Bank building, which had been bought by Georgia State. And he wanted to know what I did. So I told him, and I invited him to my office to come see me sometime and let's talk more about it. Well, I had absolutely no confidence that this man was going to come sit in my office. He did come to my office occasionally and borrow the fax machine. You youngins are going to have to look up fax machine. But John, swear to the absolutely true BHL stories. He came and sat in my office, just like that photograph.
Like the photograph. Well, first of all, that photograph doesn't look anything like your office.
Yeah, well, hold on, John. So I was telling him about what we did. And when I asked the AI to generate the picture, I said, have him looking out the window, lost in thought, distracted. And that's what happened. And I just stopped and said, is everything okay?
See,
and
this is what happens with AI. We got to watch out for.
I had been telling him about our work and the influence of Dr. Thomas Joyner and the groundbreaking myths about suicide. That's when he started looking out. And when I stopped him, he said, I had a best friend whose name was Thomas Joyner. And I said, was his son named Thomas? And he said he was. He said he was 4 years old. He was precocious. I knew he was going to do something. But, we got to finish the bit, John. At this point, you say...
all that sounds great, David, but it's clear you're just making this up.
It's absolutely true, John. You were there too, John. You were in the side of the room. You mentioned something about some Texas football team.
Yeah,
and Coach Curry said there aren't any football teams in Texas. But Thomas Joyner, did you ever remember meeting Bill Curry?
Oh, sure. I remember that incident. You telling me about it, and then my dad. I actually think if memory serves, Coach Curry was a pallbearer in my dad's funeral.
Oh, you had not told me that.
I'm pretty sure I may be conflating memories, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Yeah.
And so, my dad, he had bipolar disorder. In his darkest moments, things got very dark to the degree that he died by suicide. But he had a lot of up moments, and when he was himself, either euthymic or maybe slightly hypomanic, he had a lot of friends. He's charismatic and fun to be with, and he had a lot of friends in the football world too, and Coach Curry was one of them.
Well, Thomas, wow. So it's a perfect transition to the plain truth for this episode 8 of the podcast, John. And look, I have traveled to Atlanta since I moved to Phoenix. I was in Atlanta for almost 15 years. And I've lived in Phoenix about that long now. I've traveled back to Atlanta hundreds of times since. But I'll never forget traveling back 2 days ago, John, to go to Augusta for the funeral of Greg D. Graham, the founder and visionary behind Behavioral Health Link. And my partner, my mentor, my friend for 22 years. So I want to read the eulogy that I gave at his funeral on Wednesday. But I told everybody as we gather in that Church of the Holy Comforter therein outside of Augusta, where he and his wife Harriet were one of the founders, we come together not only to mourn the loss of Greg, but also to celebrate his remarkable life, a life dedicated to compassion, innovation, and understanding in mental health care. He left behind not only his beloved wife, Harriet, of almost 50 years, but their children, Melissa and Andrew, their families, including 10 grandchildren who filled his life with joy and pride. I had the opportunity to meet his sister, Catherine. Greg was a man whose personal experiences ground his work in empathy and relentless dedication, and were deeply entwined with his professional achievements. Thomas, very much like your own story. Greg began his career with a master's in clinical psychology, ventured into managing mental health facilities after earning an MBA. In Augusta, he founded Behavioral Health Link in the mid-90s, innovating crisis care solutions that ultimately became nationwide models. And the tragic loss of his eldest son, Monty, in 2006 spurred him to create Georgia's first crisis and access line, transforming he and his wife's personal grief into communal good. Aside from his professional life, Greg was a passionate historian. Thomas, very much as you're into philosophy, Greg studied history. His passion shone through even in his work-related conversations. I recall a time when he began to elaborate on a business stressor that we were facing using a detailed historical analogy from the Revolutionary War. Midway through, he paused, he glanced at me with a knowing smile, and he said, David, this is going to be totally lost on you, isn't it? To which I could only respond, yep. But he just smiled and continued, his enthusiasm undiminished, showing his unique ability to connect the past and the present, both adversity and opportunity. Greg's love for history was also evident in a personal journey he and Harriet undertook to Scotland as they were tracing their ancestral roots and exploring historical sites, illustrating his deep appreciation for heritage and storytelling. Colleagues and friends globally remember Greg as genuinely kind and profoundly impactful. Phil Moore from the United Kingdom noted him as a thoroughly genuine and kindly person. Leon Boyko remarked on his vast contributions to the crisis community, and Stephanie Hepburn didn't know him personally, but interviewed him and recalled his passion and kindness. Greg's legacy is not marked merely by his accolades, but more so in the lives he touched, the professionals he inspired, and the community he nurtured. His work has left an indelible imprint on mental health care systems across the nation. I said my final goodbyes to Greg. He was laid here where you see the flower on the ground right next to his son, Monty. But let us hold on to what Greg stood for: the dignity of every individual, the pursuit of a better, more compassionate world. His life teaches us that even in grief, there's a drive to aid others, a beacon of hope to many. I thank my friend Greg for his unwavering commitment, his compassion, and his leadership. He was my friend, and he will forever inspire us to carry forward his legacy, John. And that's some plain truth.
That is some very plain truth and a very poignant truth. And what a meaningful life he has left behind, and left so many people thinking about him, caring about him, and trying to carry on a legacy that he started. David, I am so privileged to step into his shadow at Behavioral Health Link and work with you and all of our colleagues to maintain that legacy. It's a tall order because he moved mountains, but thank you for your moving words.
So, John, that brings us to the end of the day, and thanks so much for our amazing guest here today, Dr. Thomas Joyner, and the Thomas, just loved what you've shared with us. And Thomas, you ought to join us next week, when our guest will be Dr. Jonathan Singer, host of the Social Work Podcast. So for all of you out there, thanks for let us pull you in again this week. Join us next time when we continue to navigate the currents of crisis and care. Until then, remember, every call, every life, every story matters. Stay connected. Stay supportive, and we'll see you on the next Lifelines.
We will. Y'all take care now. Thank you, Thomas.